So what would the real role of government, if we were in a totally objectivist society right now and we were all doing for ourselves as we see fit and living virtuous lives and all of that stuff, what actually would be the role of government?
It would be very important. So people sometimes put it as Ayn Rand's anti-government. And I would say that's like saying that if you don't think you should use a gun to shoot innocent people, you're anti-gun. No, it's that this is a tool and it has a really important purpose and a noble purpose, but only if it's serving that purpose. Just as a gun is great if it's used to defend innocent lives, but is a vicious tool if it's used to destroy innocent lives, so government, when it's used to protect freedom, is a noble and vital institution that we cannot live without. But if it's used to violate rights, then it is the most dangerous enemy that we face. And I mean, we can see this historically. When government approximated my ideal, which would be the American system in its original inception, then it unleashed the greatest wave of prosperity and happiness in human history. And when governments have gone the other route and regarded, in effect followed the collectivist idea of we're going to sacrifice the individual to the group and the spokesman of the group are going to give an unlimited power to do what's, quote, in the public good, you get every variety of totalitarianism, which really destroys human lives, human prosperity, and in the end, the human soul.
Right. So right now, if in 15 days or whatever it is, if it was an objectivist being sworn in as president, what would be the rollbacks that we would see in government in an ideal situation?
Well, I'd say
some tangible.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'll give some specifics, but one thing I think is really important is, so I'm an advocate of complete laissez-faire capitalism, but one of the principles of how, we're very far from that. And it would be dictatorial to overnight switch to it.
Sure. So, I frame the question in a way that doesn't quite make sense because you wouldn't want the president to have all the power to do all of those things, of course.
Right. But
all right. So, forgetting the president specifically, January 20th, if an objectivist government was sworn in across the board, what tangible changes would there be?
I mean, I would start decontrolling business as quickly as possible, and I'll give some specific examples in a moment. But you have people from every sort of political persuasion and every sort of economist, many of them concerned about economic growth and economic progress. I think some of those concerns are overblown, but it definitely is far slower than it should be and could be. Mm-hmm. And the reason why is not hard to discern. It's that we've made it illegal to innovate in many, many industries. We've made it so hard to build things and to create things, and certainly so hard to do it efficiently, that this is strangling our ability to move forward. And it's really strangling opportunity for the people, certainly the innovators, who potentially could revolutionize the way we live.
Is that mostly because of taxes, or are there other regulations that you're talking about?
No, it's mostly control. So if you think, a legitimate law basically proscribes, in my view, physical force. It proscribes criminal behavior. Mm-hmm. What regulations do, sometimes they do things that I think government should do under rightful laws. But what they generally do is they proscribe and prescribe productive behavior. They tell you, this is how you're going to produce. These are the approvals you have to get. These are the labels you have to put on things. These are the reports you have to file in order to get permission to build this or that. Mm-hmm. And when you put layer upon layer upon that, then you strangle and paralyze business. And particularly when they don't know what they can actually do. I mean, many of these are completely ambiguous. If you take something like antitrust laws or insider trading laws, nobody knows for certain what's going to be punished and what's not. And so those are innovation killers. And if you just look at the federal level, the Federal Register, which catalogs regulations, federal regulations, it's 30 feet long when printed out.
Yeah.
30 feet long. So, people complain about Atlas Shrugged, but try reading those.
Right. Nobody actually reads these things, I guess is the point.
No, what you get is you get bureaucrats who master like one tiny slice, and they have their favorite ones that they're going to ping you for and come down you on. And then you have lawyers who try to give you their opinion, not of what you actually can do, but in effect, like, what might you probably be able to do without getting hit too hard. And when you have that, like, the whole core of how we produce, create, and innovate is the free human mind who has an idea and is free to put it into action so long as he's not violating the rights of others. The harder you make that, the more barriers you put in it, the more you destroy progress and the less progress that we get. And so, yeah, taxes are bad. The welfare state, I think, is bad, and certainly we're in for some severe troubles when we get to the so-called entitlement programs, Medicare and Social Security. That's going to be a real big problem in government spending. But at the end of the day, I think the most destructive thing is the regulatory state. And so I would start by figuring out, like, what can we gut tomorrow? So, like, get rid of antitrust. Get rid of everything in Dodd-Frank that you can quickly get rid of without completely disrupting people's ability to plan. Start decontrolling healthcare. I think that is something that you have to fix, both because that's the main driver of our spending problems under Medicare, and because it's just so vital to human life that we have, good health care that people can actually afford. I think those would be some of my central things. And then I think you want to avoid a financial crisis or an economic crisis because A, those are just devastating on their own right, but B, that's when government has the potential to grow the fastest. So I would like to see, for instance, in the end, I want to get rid of the Federal Reserve. But at least in the short term, let's put them on something like a nominal GDP growth rule, which I think would help avoid the catastrophes like we saw in 2008 or in the Great Depression.
So some small steps. You're not getting rid of the Fed tomorrow?
No.
Yeah.
These things take time. And the presumption here is that somebody actually got elected in this program. I think you have to do these things through persuasion, through changing minds, and that's really where the hard work is.
Yeah. So I know a lot of people would say, well, wait a minute, if you got rid of some of the antitrust laws or you got rid of monopoly laws or things like that these big companies would just keep getting bigger. They would crush all the small companies, which I think you would argue are, small business is one of the most important things that we have here in the United States. So what's the argument against that?
Well, the argument against it is that you have to make a fundamental distinction. So, like, what is a monopoly? It's a business that's immune to competition. It's not one that's dominant because it's excelled and outpaced its rivals. That's something that's great. It's somebody who doesn't have to worry about its rivals, and the only way that you get that is through government protection. And indeed, monopoly in its original meaning was something the government gave you that said you could not compete with this business. So for instance, the way that you can't set up your competitor, the post office, or until Uber just ignored the regulations, the way that you could not compete with the taxi cab industry.
Right.
Those are the kind of damaging monopolies. But
so Uber's actually a great example for objectivism, right?
I think it's a great example for human beings.
Yeah.
It's really shown, first of all, the power of innovation, and it's shown one way to fight really disastrous regulations, which is if you think a regulation is insane and destructive, and you think that you have a better solution and you're being barred from doing it, and if you can get public support fast enough, this is one way to fight it rather than try to get pre-approval. Unfortunately, I don't think that model is super widely applicable, but to the extent it is, I think it's something that we really should celebrate, that they had the courage to fight that fight, because it was not obvious that they were going to win.
Yeah, and not only did they win, but now I see commercials on every day for people just, during your break or you got a day off, make a little extra money. They're fighting the monopoly and giving the power back to the people, so it's really kind of a beautiful thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so let's talk about your book, Equal is Unfair. Equal, isn't equal good? I thought equal was good. Everyone says equality is good. How could equal be unfair?
Well, equality gets applied to like a whole range of things. And in some realms, as I'm sure we'll get to talk about, yeah, I think equality is a good thing. I think it's a profoundly important thing. But we're really talking about a specific sort of debate that's been occurring in America, particularly since 2009, although it goes back before that time. And that is this idea that the chief economic challenge that we face in this country is economic inequality. And so you had, for instance, Occupy Wall Street talking about the 1% versus the 99%. You had Barack Obama coming out and say the defining challenge of our time is rising income inequality. And what we're saying is that if you're talking about equalizing economic outcomes, if you're saying that the problem is that some people make more than others, if you're treating as in any way equality in that sense as an ideal, you're advocating something profoundly immoral and unjust, because people are inherently different in all sorts of ways, but one very important one is they're different in their productive achievements. And so achievement is unequal, and so equal in that sphere is unfair.
So when we talk about the 1%, I've said many times when Bernie would be talking about the 1%, I read a couple studies. I mean, I don't know that there's actual full evidence on this, but that's something like if you make $400,000 a year, you're in the 1%. Now, I don't make $400,000 a year, so I'm not in that 1%, but if you make $400,000, you're not controlling anything. At $400,000, you don't have any real institutional power. You're certainly not buying politicians or any of that stuff. So first off, isn't just that argument in itself is really just a misnomer, right? Because we're really talking about the 0.001% or something, like the couple families that have, you know, billions and billions of dollars or whatever it is.
Yes, it's true. If you're looking at what's driving, you know, income trends, the gap between the people with the most and then everybody else is driven by kind of a very small slice of the people at the top who have seen their incomes rise relative to other people's incomes since, it depends on what date you look at, but you can say roughly, let's say 1979 is often where it will be put. That's true, and I think that's important. The deeper point is it's a bogus category. So like anytime you have a category, you have to think, is there really anything essentially the same about the people we're categorizing? When we talk about the 1% or even the 0.01%, all we know about them is that they have a certain income, at least as, you know, tracked by whatever you know, source of information we're using. You know, the Piketty, for instance, who is famous for highlighting the 1% issue, he looks at tax data. So, but in any case, is there something essentially the same between, you know, Donald Trump, Warren Buffett, Steve Jobs, Paul Krugman, and you know, Arnold Schwarzenegger? Like, there's this whole group of people who have almost nothing in common. Different political views, different virtues, different vices, different motives. Like, who
run their companies wildly differently, for those that you mentioned that have companies.
Some people getting special favors from the government, some people achieving really great things. To put them in the same category and that you're going to morally evaluate them and then legally treat them in a particular way because they're in this income category, you've, by that very fact, gone off the rails in your thinking. Like, this is a debate about justice fundamentally. And justice means treating individuals as they deserve to be treated, not funneling individuals into some bogus category and treating them all the same regardless of their own virtues or vices.
So is this partly where crony capitalism has gone crazy? So when you see, for example, that, like, you know, 3 of the top 10, I think, wealthiest people in the United States are members of the Walmart family. And then you also see that their employees are paid very little. You know, there's always a story around Christmas, how they, at some of the stores, they take gifts. They donate gifts for their own employees. Employees are donating gifts to other employees that make less. That discrepancy is based in crony capitalism because somehow the laws have been written so that the family and those top people can keep getting wealthier while nothing happens for the people beneath it.
Well, you have to be clear on your concepts, and one of the problems with the way that we talk about cronyism is that nobody's really clear on exactly what they mean by it. And sometimes they use an even less clear concept of rent seeking, which is a whole different discussion.
Right.
But what I mean by it is it has a very sharp meaning. Are you using the government as basically a gun to stop other people from competing with you, or to take their stuff, to get money that you are not entitled to? The Walmart heirs were legitimate heirs, and they are owners in large share of a very productive company. You might be able to find some kind of like marginal cases where Walmart got some special favor from a local government, but in essence, it's an enormously productive company. I'd say all of those people earned, you know, their incomes. They have a right to them. The reason that many people who work at Walmart are low paid, at least low paid by what outsiders say, judged by the fact that they choose to work there, they view it as better than their alternatives. To go back, you know, to some of the things we've been talking about. The gap is, how productive are you? And there's basically 2 sources of being productive. One is that you have a lot of capital that you can put to work, and so there's competition for your capital. and then you have to use your judgment about how best to invest it. And then there is the productive ability. How productive are you? So for instance, would it, I mean, here's the way I like to think about it, which is, to take Jeff Bezos, who runs Amazon. Here's somebody who's providing economic value to millions of people each day, millions of customers each day, millions of investors each day. Well, that's more ambiguous, right? Because they don't know, they only started turning a profit despite
Right.
themselves.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, my wife, by contrast, amazing teacher, but she's a teacher. She's providing economic value to maybe 30 kids a year or something like that. Is it shocking that he makes infinity times more than her? No, that's proper. Like that's exactly what you get. Like he should be rewarded for it because he's creating so much more value. The real question is, are people free to rise by their ability? Are they free to take advantage of opportunities? Or are there barriers in the way? But the idea that people should be rewarded anywhere close to a Jeff Bezos simply because they exist, what it really means, and the only way to achieve it, is to penalize Bezos for being so good, so productive. And I think that is the dark heart at the core of the inequality campaign. It's not that they care so much about the workers at Walmart, it's that they hate the people who create Walmarts and Amazon. It's that they view that with resentment and envy and want to tear it down. And what they do then, because that's a really ugly motive, but what they do then is that they concoct arguments to rationalize that hatred. And those arguments, unfortunately, appeal to many better people who are just confused by the issue or persuaded by their arguments. And so what we try to do in our book on inequality is we try to peel back those rationalizations and show we have a lot of problems in this country, a lot of economic challenges, but if we want to think about them in a moral, just way and reach just conclusions, we need to stop thinking about it in terms of groups and in terms of some groups having more than others. We have a lot of problems, but the gap between what one person makes and what another makes is not one of them.
So is a lot of it then just an optics issue? Because I think the average person that's listening to this would say, wait a minute. If the Walmart family, do you have any idea what their net worth is? I don't know.
No, it's been a while since.
Okay, they've got a couple $1 billion, let's say, right?
But isn't it weird that like people are interested in that, know that? Like my attitude is, your net worth is none of my business.
I mean, my attitude is I don't really like going to Walmart because I find it to be rather depressing, but I know in some other areas it's a little bit better. But I think the average person watching this that doesn't fully grasp all of this would say, wait a minute, if this family has billions and billions of dollars and their average employee, let's say they make $12, again, I'm just ballparking something, $12 an hour, why not allow all of their employees to make $15 an hour? Thus, all of those people have a little more money in their pocket, more money to spend. They can eat better, take better care of themselves, et cetera, et cetera. And at the same time, you'll have only punished or taken away from the Walmart family a very small slice of what they have. Now, I know obviously you don't agree with that, but how do you then change that, the optics of that? Because I think that argument makes sense to a lot of people. Like, these people they have an absurd amount of wealth that they don't need. Why wouldn't it just be better to do it the other way?
Well, notice the way you set the whole thing up, that they don't need. So the basic idea is you don't have a right to anything unless you prove that you, quote, need it. Well, who's going to decide what you need and what you don't need? Like, you live in, a nice house in Los Angeles, right? Like, do you need that? Couldn't you get by living in a small shack, somewhere out in the mountains or something like that?
I did the small shack thing for years. It's not great.
And so I can compare you to some people on Skid Row and say, we need to drag this guy down a lot because he doesn't need this. Once you empower the government to decide what people need and take from them anything that you say they don't really need, it can be used from somewhere else, you've basically obliterated any concept of freedom. It really unleashes that sort of thing. The whole setup, right? We can agree that, oh man, I'd love it if people who work really hard and are really good people make more than $12 an hour. But why are we contrasting that with the success of other people? No, you need to think about, the thing that's holding them back is not the greed and selfishness of the people who give them jobs so that they can make 12 rather than 0. No, the problem is, well, there can be a number of problems. One problem could be that you know, they don't have a very good education. Well, who monopolized education and basically subjected Americans to an awful education? Oh, well, that's the government. You can ask, for instance, maybe they have a skill that they can't exercise, that, you know, they'd be able to rise and create their own business, say, you know, doing hair. Oh, well, who puts occupational licensing requirements that stop poor people from rising? Oh, that's the government. So if you're really concerned with opportunity for people at the bottom, what they need is not the opportunity to pick other people's pockets. They need the opportunity that is provided by freedom for every producer, no matter how rich or how poor, to decide how best can I become more productive, more successful, and find a career that gives me material remuneration and real meaning.
Yeah. So circling back to something you said at the beginning, where does the art piece of the objectivist philosophy fit into this? Because I think that if objectivism missed one piece in these last 20 years, it's the art part, in that these ideas don't bubble up to anything cool that comes out on television or in movies or whatever. They've just missed this, while at the same time we've seen the rise of the social justice warriors, which is the complete reverse of everything that you're talking about. So I do sense the tide is changing there, but do you think there was an opportunity missed somehow, just in the art part, in like the cool factor of whatever, either Hollywood stuff or video games or something?
I mean, I would definitely love to see that and see more of it.
Because we can do this intellectually, and a lot of people will be like, you know, I get all that stuff, but a key piece of objectivism is the art component.
No, for sure. And I mean, the reason why we're sitting here and that these ideas were just, you know, not the ideas of one individual who like 5 people ever heard of, is because she created art out of it. She embedded her ideas in amazing stories that, you know, sell incredibly well more than 50 years after they were written. But I certainly think that there should be a lot more of that. Not propaganda, but people doing just things that are really great, and people going like, oh wow, you know, where did you get these ideas from? And that's a really cool, inspiring vision of life. You know, where did that come from? I mean, there's certainly been some of it, but there could be, you know, way more.
Yeah. So the social justice warriors, this is the reverse, or as I'm now calling them, the bigoteers. This group of people, that was originally Tim Ferriss came up with that one, but this group, this group think, this is really the complete antithesis of everything you've been talking about, right?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. So you know, the social justice warriors, they're kind of they come out of universities. They're basically preached with, you know, postmodernism, which is the like worst of the anti-enlightenment views. It's we're going to reject, you know, we're going to reject reason, we're going to reject individualism. Everything is, we're just these little balkanized collectives who are at war with one another, and anything done in the name of helping the oppressed is good, and anything done in the name of punishing the punishing the oppressors is good, and anything done by the so-called oppressors is bad.
Yeah.
And then in art, to top it all off, like, you know, the postmodernist art movement was really the destruction of art. So, like, I mean, that, you know, is just the icing on the cake of how they're the opposite of everything that objectivism stands for.
Now you realize that a certain amount of them that are watching this right now are going, wait a minute, he's a white, cisgendered, able-bodied male. Can't listen to anything he says.
You know, I don't feel guilty for anything that is not the result of my choice. I don't think that a person should be judged on anything that was not the product of his choice, certainly not a moral judgment. And I certainly don't think that my right to speak, to have ideas, and to argue is contingent upon being born in a so-called, you know, victimized category. I think that is a complete corruption, and anybody who apologizes for it or tries to, you know, prove that they're not racist or, you know, like, what am I supposed to do? In order to speak, should I basically throw out my money, like have my skin dyed or chop off a limb? Like, that is...
A certain amount of people would say yes to that.
Yeah, and that reveals how insane and bankrupt their view is. That is not an argument. It is not a real concern with helping the oppressed to try to dismiss the ideas of people because of their skin color or because of their sex. That is an attempt to silence debate, because you cannot win a real debate. And they know they can't win a real debate. If you look at the postmodernists, the reason that they were figuring out, well, like, nobody agrees with us, and they're so corrupted by capitalism that we can't actually persuade them. So basically, we have to do whatever it takes, including using force and smears, in order to overthrow the system, and then everybody will realize that we're right. You know, there'll be the blinds will be pulled down, and you know their eyes will be open.
Yeah.
Like, you know, and guess what? Like, I'm in a minority too, of an intellectual minority, and my view is then, well, it's incumbent upon me to be more persuasive than people who are in the majority. It's not that I have the right to silence my opponents.
Yeah, and it's so fascinating how, you know, these people consistently do this, especially online, all this virtue signaling. There's plenty of people that share a lot of those views that I've invited on here after seeing, you know, them scream about something online, and then they don't want to actually debate their ideas. And I wouldn't even be a debate. I would sit them down just as I've sat you down and say, tell me what you think.
Yeah,
and I would treat them with literally the exact same respect.
If somebody's scared to come on your show, I think that's really,
I would let
really
them,
revealing.
Yeah, well, even just in this last couple weeks, you know, this whole Milo book thing that you probably saw, you got this book deal with Simon & Schuster, and I saw a couple big Hollywood celebrities trying to shame Simon & Schuster. I said, well, why don't you guys come on my show with Milo and we'll just talk it out. And, you know, nothing.
But you know, there's a very simple way to oppose these people, which is don't appease them. Not 1 inch. You don't apologize, you don't back down, you don't give in, you don't try to prove that, you know, you fit what they regard as virtue.
Yeah.
And if you don't do that, they have nothing to say. They have nothing that is inspiring in their vision. It's a really sad and terrifying vision. And the important part is that you stand for something positive and know why you stand for it. And if you do that and don't back down, this is, like, they are not a problem. They'll scurry away like cockroaches.
Yeah, you know, it's funny, that's such a fitting way to end this, because I do find that a lot of people email me all the time that are saying, you know, I'm breaking out of this SJW thing, but there's such guilt that they have because their whole ethos has been formulated around these ideas. So even when you start realizing, you may not be an objectivist, you may not be a libertarian, a lot of them still describe themselves as liberals or as conservatives, sometimes I get Christian conservatives, whatever it is, but their whole identity is so built around all of this fake virtue stuff that they're still afraid to say what they think. They say, I can't tell my boyfriend what I think, or I can't tell my cousin what I think. That's how damaging it is actually to the human condition.
Well, it is really critical decision in life. Few things are more critical than what you base your self-esteem, or at least your pretense of self-esteem, on. If you base it on being part of a cause, if you base it on being a victim, if you base it on fighting for, you know, victims, then that is a precarious and really destructive thing to base it on. In the same way that if you base it on making a lot of money and you're going to base your self-esteem on getting a lot of prestige or applause from people, like, the question, what is a sturdy foundation of self-esteem, is really, really important. And that is, in the end, I think one of Ayn Rand's chief messages is that what you have to base your self-esteem on is your virtue, your achievement, and do you judge how you've lived your life as good? And she thinks ultimately the answer is that question turns into is, have you lived by reason? Have you never surrendered your conviction in your mind and lived a rational, productive life? And if you do that, like if you're throwing away something like your adherence to something like SJW, look for that rock solid foundation for your self-esteem, and then, you know, it becomes less a tragedy and more kind of like a hopeful future.
For more on Don's work, check out donswriting.com.